Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we unravel the business complexities at the intersection of environmental, social, and governance issues.
I'm Erica Schiller, and I'm joined by my ClimeCo colleagues, Emma Cox and Anna Stablum.
Get ready to explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership, the dynamic forces shaping our global economy.
From climate action to social responsibility, we're here to decode the ESG landscape by interviewing interesting leading figures across the globe that will empower you with actionable insights.
Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or just embarking on your sustainability journey, this podcast is your compass for navigating the future of responsible business practices.
Let's decode ESG together.
As you might have heard in our intro, we welcomed a new host. We'd like to introduce Emma Cox, Executive Vice President of Commercial at ClimeCo, as our latest addition to the ESG Decoded podcast team.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Erica. I'm particularly excited to join both of you as friends and colleagues to share my perspective on impact communications and corporate sustainability, which are two of my passions, really leaning into my professional experience. I'm based here in Chicago, and I'm really looking forward to connecting with our global listeners. This is going to be fun.
Welcome, Emma.
Hello, my name is Emma Cox, and I am one of your hosts for ESG Decoded. Today, I am thrilled to invite Daniel Lawse onto the show. Daniel is the co-founder and co-owner of Verdis Group. As Verdis Group's chief century thinker, Daniel brings his passion to cultivate adaptive, regenerative, and resilient solutions for communities and organizations to thrive. We think that ESG Decoded listeners interested in integrating living systems frameworks into organizational operations and accelerating climate action will benefit from Daniel's unique approach, whether they're in public health, animal and ecosystem conservation, ESG, or airport and mobility spaces. Welcome to the show, Daniel. Please tell us, what does a chief century thinker do?
A chief century thinker. It's the beauty of being a co-owner, and I can make up my own title. And I chose it because it reminds me that one of the most important things I can do is think long term. And it's one of the most important things that our partners can do when you're thinking about creating a world where everybody can thrive. I used to give a lot of presentations to various groups, and one of the things I would joke, especially with the student groups who sometimes don't pay attention as much, I'd say, you know what? If you forget everything else I say, just remember to think in the long term, because it changes everything. So chief century thinker, it's my job to help other people to remember to think long term. It's one of the critical shifts that I try to embed in the work that we do.
That's great. Thank you, Daniel. And I'm wondering, did you pick that title before or after you became passionate about sustainability and the work that you do?
That was after. It was quite a journey to get to the place where I kind of joked that I accidentally co-founded this business with my partner, Craig Moody. We both were at different interesting career places, and we came together, met several times. We were both very active in the Omaha community, Young Professionals Summit, Green Neighborhood Council, and Green Omaha Coalition. And we said we wanted to have a big impact. And we thought that a big impact around how humans and the environment interact and relate was the place where this could happen. And so that was how Verdis formed, was around my kitchen table talking about how can we have a big impact, specifically with the environment and climate. But before that, it came about for me through this kind of philosophical lens and deep desire that we can live better than we live today. All beings can thrive, plants, animals, humans. And what I witnessed growing up and in my early career and still do today is the relationship that many humans have with our planet is not in good shape. It's disruptive. It's more one way. We even talk in the language of natural resources, like nature is a resource for us to consume and use and manipulate, rather than speaking about nature in terms of relationship. We are in my goal is to strive to be in right relationship with nature, because there are living systems all around us. We are part of nature. And when we recognize those fundamental principles of a living system, and that we are beholden to those, everything from the law of gravity, right? The physical world around us, to the fact that living systems are always changing. When we think that we can control and hold on to things and like live in this static world where we make this decision and nothing ever changes, it puts us in direct conflict with the way the world works. So I've always been one to say, like, how do we go with the flow? How do we work with the systems that are around us? And that has led me to like, how can we be in right relationship with the planet? And the last thing I'll say, like, for me, a personal mission is to really co-create a world where everybody can thrive. And to do that, we need to heal the relationship between people and the planet. So that's my personal mission of healing relationships.
I love that, Daniel. And you were starting to get at something that is near and dear to my heart. But healing a relationship, and you don't often think about that, from a planet to its inhabitants, right? And so I almost think of your role as a therapist, right? And so how do you, and you and I, we talked a lot about this in our pre-call, but I'm curious, we talked a lot about behavior change. So tell me, do you think that behavior change is sort of the answer to this relationship repair? And how do we even start with behavior change? Humans are such complicated things. So tell me, how do you start?
How do we start? That's a great question. We're both complicated and we're simple. Behavior change, I'll start with an aha moment I had in my profession of being hired to help organizations become more efficient, reduce resource use, be responsible with their resource management. We started our company at a time in the middle of America when we didn't talk about climate change in Nebraska. We talked about being efficient, saving money, being good stewards of resources, which is all good stuff. And there were co-benefits that helped reduce emissions. But in this journey of starting Verdis and continuing to learn, I came across Jevons paradox, which is this fascinating idea that Jevons came up with in the late 1800s Britain. And he said, the more efficient we become with coal, the more coal we're actually going to use. So when we become efficient with the steam engine, we can do more work with less coal, which means the price for coal will drop, which will increase the demand for it. And I was just like, okay, this is interesting. And then I read a book that took that concept to refrigeration and efficiency in the home. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, so am I completely ruining the planet by helping people become more efficient? Because as an example, refrigeration, when it was really expensive and inefficient, it was not widespread. The more efficient we got with it, the more cost effective it became. And then we had air conditioning in homes. We had refrigerators. We had 2 refrigerators in houses with 3 refrigerators. And we had air conditioning in cars. So we would drive long distances in the heat of the summer using a lot of air conditioning. So this idea that because we become more efficient, which there's good things about efficiency, we will, if not paying attention, consume more of that resource because of the economies of supply and demand. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't just help people become more efficient. I have to help them think differently, which is where the behavior change comes into play. And when I think about behavior change, it's really hard to tell somebody to change how they act, right? I don't know if you have people in your life at work or at home or family, and you're like, why don't you do that differently? They usually resist. We're humans. We don't like to be told what to do. But if we start to shift worldviews, if we start from the place of recognizing that how we think matters, how we think influences the words that we use and how we speak, and those words and that speech then can lead to actions. If you slow the thought to motion down really, really microscopically slow, we don't move our hand or go dancing or jump into the pool without thinking first, even if it's subconscious and in a split second. So if we can change the operating system, is another way I talk about this, of our minds, our worldviews, it will have this ripple effect across how we show up and the choices that we make. So when it comes to Jevons paradox and becoming more efficient means more resource use, the solution to that is becoming conscious of what our decisions mean. And when I begin to align my worldview with what I care about, resources in the environment are not for me to use and consume, but they're for me to relate with and recognize that my thriving is part of the thriving of the planet. I just have been reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's The Serviceberry. I don't know if you have this book or have read it. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. That was one that really made her popular. And I keep going to the back of this book, and the back of the book says all flourishing is mutual. And when I think about how do we live in this world, I look to nature for a lot of lessons. And when you look to nature, the flourishing of plants and animals and humans, when you get right down to it, it's mutual. It's about relationship. So helping shift that worldview to an interdependent, long-term thinking, like my title, open system, and ever-changing will help us change the behaviors that we do, the choices that we make, whether we're a consumer picking out a product or we're an organizational leader who is deciding how we're going to address climate action within our organization.
I love that. Daniel, what you just described was so beautiful and very deep and philosophical. I'm wondering if we could get more tactical and think about, how do we initiate behavior change? And in my role, I often think about the power of communication. And something you said reminded me of the work that I do, which is business development, yes, but a lot of business development is translating and listening. So listening to what our clients need and then translating what the solution for them could be in their language, right? And so speaking their language, getting them to see a different perspective while speaking their language is a tactic that I use to sort of initiate behavior change. Can you talk about some of the tactics that you use and some of the work that you do to shift behavior change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many examples. I'm reminded of community-based social marketing. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And maybe some of your listeners are as well. But one of the basic premise there is if you're trying to get people to recycle more, you need to go understand why they're not recycling. You need to listen. And it's interesting from a business development standpoint, a lot of folks are like, just give me the strategy and what to do. And they don't want to spend time investing in that discovery phase and really understanding what the key barriers are for folks and what the key drivers are for folks. And so when you take time to listen, understand, and talk to the people who are actually impacted, am I not recycling in a big cultural institution because I don't know if things are recyclable? Am I not recycling because the signage isn't good? Because the bins are further apart? You've got trash over here and recycling over here, and I'm just going to throw it in the closest bin that I have. So you have to go talk to them and understand. And that's where you discover what those key barriers are. And oftentimes it is something simple like, you know what? The thing that you sell at your cafe doesn't match the sign that I see. There's different pictures and words. And so I get confused. Is my thing actually recyclable? And when I'm confused, I just throw it away. Or I'm so busy, like in a rush, I'm juggling 3 kids, and maybe I'm a mom with a stroller too, and I'm trying to hold on to my beverage as well as wrangle my children. And I just want to put something in the nearest can that's convenient. But maybe if the whole size matches my drink, then I will put the can in that recycling bin. So those are the types of things, just as one example, is that community-based social marketing. What are those actual barriers that are preventing the behavior from actually happening?
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, you said it earlier, humans, yes, we are complicated, but we're also very simple. In a lot of ways too, it's figuring out what motivates somebody to take action. So, am I motivated by money and incentive? Am I motivated by doing the right thing, right? And so I think part of the listening is pulling out what's important to that person or that organization or company and what will drive them to make change and to change their behavior. So do you have anything to say about that?
I love what you just said, and I would even kind of use a different word about values. What do we value? And how do we weave those values together? Because if you ask a person what do they value enough times, you can often get to similar values, even if the application started in a different place. And there's this one example that I love to share with a partner of ours, that when we first started with them, we were assessing their sustainability efforts. We weren't intended to do a whole plan for them or set goals, but then as we were assessing, it became clear that they needed to reset with their goals. And there was, like many large organizations, a group of people who wanted sustainability to move faster and further, and a group of people who didn't necessarily understand why this was important. This was back before the pandemic. And maybe we're like, I don't want sustainability to move too fast. It kind of scares me. And so one of the things that we did to help, setting context is another way to get people to change behaviors and understand what's important, get aligned. So we had this meeting with the sustainability project team that had senior leadership from the C-suite to middle managers and organizational leaders. And in the room, people were on the spectrum of move fast or, ooh, why am I here? And so I asked everybody if they were willing to be uncomfortable. Sometimes naming the invisible things is the thing that unleashes an opportunity. And I asked all these folks to raise their hand. Are you okay being uncomfortable in this process? Some of you might want to be moving faster than what we're going to move. Some of you might want to be moving slower. Are you okay to sit in the discomfort and trust that the process at the end will converge to a place that we all come together on? And I didn't know how this was going to end, but I also had to trust too. So we all raised our hands. We said, we're okay with this. So through this process, we're bumping up against typical organizational barriers. Oh, sustainability costs a lot, or I don't like it when we're told what to do, and we shouldn't be telling our employees how to act or how to behave in the workplace. And one of the things we realized through this process is that they needed to create an integrated story to understand their origins and their core purpose and values, and help them understand that sustainability was actually part of that. So we had this storytelling workshop where we looked back in their history, and there was this moment that was eye-opening for a gentleman who was kind of on the side of, I don't want to go too far too fast. I'm a little unsure why this is as important as we think we're talking like it is. And he stood up in this storytelling workshop and he realized, he had an aha moment of like, we were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. It was one of those moments where he saw through the history of the organization and the core values and mission that they are responsible to be good stewards of the resources that they have. That includes the environment in which they're located and their neighbors. So there was a moment of shift there for this gentleman. And then we're, fast forward to the end of the project, and we're getting ready to propose goals to the CEO. And for an emissions reduction goal, again, this is before 2020, we were looking at a 60% reduction or an 80% emissions reduction by 2030. So far enough away that we could maybe imagine it, but also there were a lot of uncertainties. Nobody knew a pandemic was coming and the price of renewable energy and technological advancements. And the room was starting to lean towards, we should propose 60%. We're a relatively risk-averse organization. We feel comfortable with 60. There's a pretty good path of efficiency measures and renewable energy opportunities that we can see how we can get to 60. 80% feels a little scary. And this gentleman who was cautious at first, and he had a role where he was connected to policymaking, both within the organization and externally. And so he said, you know what? I think we've got to go for 80%. Why would we just settle for 60? We need to be bold. We need to be a leader in this space. And I think that we should recommend 80% emissions reduction.
So he became your strongest advocate.
He turned from cautious, what's going on here, to big champion. And because of his positional authority and role within the organization, it gave everybody else permission, even those who wanted to, but were kind of shying back to 60% to be cautious. They're like, yeah, let's do it. We proposed 80% and the CEO accepted it, and they've been trucking towards it ever since. So that type of behavior change to me had a couple key pieces to it. One was naming that it's going to be hard, that it's going to be uncomfortable, and being okay with that. And another big one was that value piece. Through the storytelling and looking back, we were able to help folks across the organization see that this is actually part of who we are, to be a sustainability organization. And I mean, you know this as well as I, Emma, like sustainability is just good business when it gets right down to it. It's not crazy. It's not expensive things that you have to do left and right. It's just good business. It's being a responsible steward of our resources It's being in right relationship with how we interact with our natural environment and our people and our neighbors and our customers and our stakeholders.
I love that. Thank you, Daniel. So as you were talking, I was thinking about an experience I had at Climate Week this year in New York, where I actually went to a cocktail event and had a conversation with Rainn Wilson, who is one of the co-founders of Climate Base Camp, which is an organization that works to move the movable middle, which represents apparently about 75% of the population. So a big percentage. I'm curious then, with that theory, do you think that the movable middle is the only influenceable group?
From just being a steward of our time and energy as sustainability professionals, I would say I wouldn't go to the detractors. I don't want to spend my time spinning wheels trying to convince somebody who is primarily unconvincible. And there is a percentage of those folks, right? I'm thinking about the adoption of innovation, right? Bleeding edge, early adopters, early majority, late majority. So most of the shifts that I feel happen in that early majority and early adopter space. I think if I were to put this gentleman on that spectrum, he was probably a late majority person. And so getting somebody like that to become a champion is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't always happen. So the movable middle, when I think about that, like even in that movable middle, there's a spectrum of people who are more primed and ready to actually move. And on the other end, towards that other side, it's gonna take more work. So part of me is just the efficiency of I only have so much time and energy, and my team does. So I don't want to spend 10 times that as energy trying to convince one person if I could spend 5 times the energy and convince 5 people. It's almost like the Pareto effect, right? The 80-20 rule. Yeah. 80% of that movable middle is probably pretty movable. So let's not waste a lot of energy on that 20%.
Totally. Sounds like you and Rainn are aligned. Well, Daniel, we're coming up to the end of our time here, but I did want to ask you a fun question to close us out here, which is, in looking at your bio, I couldn't help but notice that you are a founding faculty member of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Sustainability Institute. So I have to ask if you could share a little bit more about why this role, and what do you think the role of zoos and aquariums plays in the world of sustainability? I know just based on our conversation, you sort of have a very clear approach to making change, making positive change. So would love to just hear a little bit more from you about that role.
Yeah, working with zoos and aquariums is so inspiring. We get the opportunity to work with them all over North America, and I've met folks from the international zoo and aquarium world. These folks are literally in the field racing extinction, keeping animals alive that would otherwise be gone, and we'd never see them again except in a museum. So we want to avoid that. And they understand that there's conservation in the field, which is really important. And they understand that they have an opportunity to educate and be a leader for those guests who are coming through the door, whether you're just going because you want to have a fun weekend with your family or the grandparents and the grandkids. How can we help folks get connected to those animals, have some empathy for them, care for them, value them, get in right relationship with them? I'm adding some of my own words here, so that they realize that there are actually things they can do in their own lives, from their own reducing energy use, reducing emissions in their own lives or their businesses. Because climate change is one of the driving factors of habitat loss, because climate change is pushing animals to the brink of extinction, it's moving migration patterns, it's moving habitat areas, ecosystems where animals could live are shifting. Elevations of mountainous animals are going up higher because they have to get to the cooler temperatures. So there's a pretty strong connection between conservation folks and doing climate action. And they do that in a couple of different ways. Like, they're doing so much research to help inform what can we do, but they also have these institutions that consume resources. And so are they driving towards net zero emissions themselves? We work with a number of aquariums through the Aquarium Conservation Partnership that are setting net zero emission goals. Over 20 of them have set net zero goals. It's really exciting. And they like collective action. So they know that they can do things on their own, but when they come together as zoos and aquariums, they can do even more. because of their leadership role. And a fun fact is zoos and aquariums are one of the most trusted institutions in a community, more trusted often than universities, even newspapers, governments. And so they really take that leadership and trust seriously, and they want to make sure they're not breaching any trust, but they can be really influential leaders when they communicate well and do it in a good way to help folks understand what they can do at home.
That's great. I knew you would have a wonderfully connected answer to that question, and the way that you think is so systems focused and everything is interconnected. And I think we have an opportunity in our lives individually as professionals, sustainability professionals, to make those links. And I think you've done that beautifully. So Daniel, I'll pass it to you to sort of close us out. I always like to offer the space to our guests to send a message to our listeners. If there is anything you would like for our listeners to take away from today's listen or just day, what would you like to say?
Well, I guess I'll just bring it full circle and go back to my title, right? Chief Century Thinker. What changes in your life if you start to think beyond just today? Or if you're a business person, thinking beyond quarterly profits? Or if you're an elected official, thinking beyond just the next election cycle and what do I have to do to get elected? But what if instead you start to think in 7 generations? You start to think in centuries. The decisions that you make will change, and it will be transformational for your family, for your neighborhood, for your community, for your business, for your city, for the world. So yeah, if you can just extend that time horizon of how you think, I think a lot of beautiful things will change in your world, and you will be a happier, more fulfilled and thriving, flourishing person and community because of it.
Thank you so much for that message, Daniel. And thank you so much for joining us on ESG Decoded. We were so happy to have you, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Emma. What a gift to share this conversation with you.
Thanks for tuning in to ESG Decoded. We hope this episode has inspired you to take action in your own ESG journey, stimulating ideas for partnership and innovation.
New episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesday morning. Subscribe now on your favorite streaming platform to stay in the loop.
Join the conversation on social media using @ESG Decoded or visit climbco.com for more resources.
Until next time, keep decoding, keep innovating, and keep making a positive impact.